the Pharisees came up to him and tested him by asking, "Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause?" Now, understand, they were not coming for advice. They were not coming to understand the Scriptures more clearly. They were not coming to this very well-known and well-respected rabbi in order to understand the walk with God more clearly. Absolutely not. They were trying to trap Jesus. And they concocted all kinds of different theological traps they thought were pretty foolproof. That if Jesus answered one way, he would be trapped. If he answered another way, he would be trapped. And so that's what this is. This is one of those. Now, why were they bringing this up? Is it lawful, they said, to divorce one's wife for any cause? Now, the law of Moses did have provisions for the dissolving of a marriage, divorce. And if you want to jot down Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 1 through 4, where that is actually discussed. Now, in the law, it says that divorce for Israel, for the Jews, under the law of Moses, could only be performed by a man. So the husband was the only one that could divorce. And in order to divorce his wife, he had to find, quote, something indecent about his wife. Okay, so that's what they had in the law. And then Moses said, you can write her a certificate of divorce. That becomes very important in a moment, and I'll explain why. Now, over the years, there had been two schools of thought that had arisen in Judaism about this idea of finding something indecent. Those who basically wanted to divorce for any reason whatsoever construed the law to mean that something indecent could be pretty much anything that they wanted it to be. Some guys even divorced their wives because they burned the dinner. Some divorced their wives because they found someone else perhaps younger and more attractive. And so then they suddenly found something indecent about their wife and could divorce them. But in reality, the only real way of a legal divorce was for sexual misconduct, adultery, for lack of sexual fidelity in the marriage relationship. So, here were the stakes. In that culture, when a woman got married, her family provided what's called a dowry. And a dowry was property, slaves, money, all kinds of things could be put into that dowry, and it went with the wife to the husband. Now, if the husband divorced his wife and gave her a certificate of divorce, when she remarried, the husband had to give back the dowry so she could bring it with her to the new marriage, unless it was for sexual misconduct. Then the husband got to keep all of that land and all those slaves and all that money. So you can kind of see with the nature of the flesh how it would tend to make people think in their brains, maybe if they weren't even consciously aware of it, how can I do this so I get to keep all this stuff? Because basically I'm greedy. So suddenly anything became sexual misconduct. You were looking at that other guy, and I know you were lusting after him in your heart, and you probably did it with him anyway, and so I'm writing you a certificate of divorce, sexual misconduct. You can't get your dowry back. When in reality, there was absolutely no truth to it whatsoever. So that was a reality of what had been taking place. Now, there was another school of thought then that found that divorce could only happen for sexual misconduct. So these two things were going on in that world. So the Pharisees here are basically trying to trap Jesus. If he's too strict about divorce, then all of these people that have gathered around him would think, oh my goodness, I can never live up to this standard. I'm on the outs. God is not going to accept me, and Jesus is this legalist. He's no better than these Pharisees, and so I'm not going to follow him anymore. If he was too lax and basically said, oh yeah, you can divorce for any reason that you want, which is what the Pharisees were asking him to interpret the law for them, then he would be discredited because he would be seen as going against the law. So here's their reference. The Pharisees and the people that were in these two schools of thought, especially the one about, finding any reason whatsoever for divorce, were basically looking for loopholes in the law. We want to do what we want to do, and we're going to find a way to do it. Expediency. And while the Pharisees were looking for loopholes or looking to catch Jesus in loopholes, Jesus was actually wanting to follow God's character and how good God's character really is. And what he's going to talk about here is not a loophole in the law, not really the law itself at all. He's going to go before the law. He's going to go above the law. He's going to go back to the beginning. Because in fact, the law was written because of our weakness. The law was written because we cannot follow the character of God. And here's one of the main points, and I'm sorry I'm giving it to you early here, but anyway, is that because of our flesh, God has to put controls on us to keep us from just wiping each other out. That's what the law was really about. And later, Paul tells us that it's because of the law that we have knowledge of sin. If it was just, can't we just all hold hands and sing Kumbaya, and can't we just all get along, and everybody's good in the bottom of their heart, and all that kind of stuff, if we were all like God, it would be wonderful. Nobody would ever hurt anybody else. Nobody would murder anybody. Nobody would be greedy. All that kind of stuff. But the fact is, we are riddled with a sinful nature. And so God said, I'm going to put some, it's like in the bowling alley, when you are just first bowling and they put up those little bumpers so that the ball doesn't go in the gutter. That's kind of like what the law is, to keep our world from going into the gutter. It doesn't really make us righteous. It's just putting controls on the flesh. So here's what Jesus said. Here's his response. I love it. He says, verse 4, he answered, have you not read, which was really a slam. He goes, hey guys, you might try picking up your Bible now and again. He says, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? And he said, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. So what Jesus does here is that it was a kind of a tool of the rabbis that was pretty well established, and that is that the earlier text outweighs the later. And so what Jesus does is he goes to the writings of Moses, right? But he goes before the law, he goes before Deuteronomy, he goes back to Genesis and quotes the first text about the subject in order to make his point. He says, marriage was created by God, and it ought not to be dissolved. And they said to him in verse 7, why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and to send her away? Referring back to the passage in Deuteronomy. And he said to them, because of your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. So, Jesus is saying, look, you guys are just trying to find a way out of marriage so you can do what your flesh wants to do. But you got to understand that this is something that God created before the law even came about. And they were focusing on marriage as a legal issue, a contract,